Part 4. Medusa's lair was having a clearance sale on lawn statuary. Just as the Grey sisters had described, the cave sat halfway up a steep cliff overlooking the sea. The mouth of the cavern and the narrow trail leading up to it were decorated with life-size marble warriors. Some had swords raised, others cowered behind their shields. One dude was crouched with his pants around his ankles, which was a really bad way to be frozen for all time. All the would-be heroes had one thing in common, an expression of absolute horror. As the sun rose over the cliffs, shadows moved across the statues, making them look alive. That didn't help Perseus's nerves. Since he was flying, he didn't have to worry about the treacherous path. Since he was invisible, he didn't have to worry about being seen. Still, he was super tense. He looked at the dozens of mortals who tried to do what he was about to do. Each of them had been brave enough to come here. Each had been determined to kill Medusa. Now, all of them were dead. Or were they dead? Maybe they stayed conscious after they turned to stone, which would be even worse. Perseus imagined standing frozen forever, no matter how much your nose itched, waiting until you cracked and crumbled into pieces. This time it will be different, Perseus told himself. These guys didn't have two gods helping them out. But he wasn't sure about that either. What if he was only the latest in a long line of godly experiments? Maybe Hermes and Athena were sitting up on Mount Olympus watching his progress. And if he failed, they'd be like, well, that didn't work. Send in the next guy. He landed at the entrance of the cave. He crept inside, his shield raised, his sword unsheathed. The interior was dark and crowded with even more marble heroes. Perseus navigated around a spear-wielding guy in full armor, an archer with a cracked stone bow, a hairy pot-bellied guy wearing only a loincloth who was completely unarmed. Apparently the guy's plan had been to surprise Medusa by running in, yelling, waving his arms, and being even more ugly than the Gorgons. It hadn't worked. The farther Perseus went into the cave, the darker it got. Frozen heroes stared at him from their contorted faces. Stone blades poked him in uncomfortable spots. At last he heard a chorus of soft hissing from the back of the room, the sound of hundreds of tiny snakes. His mouth tasted like battery acid. He raised the polished surface of his shield and saw the reflection of a woman sleeping on a cot about 50 feet away. As she lay on her back with her arms folded over her face, she seemed almost human. She wore a simple white chiton, and her belly looked unusually swollen. Wait. Medusa was pregnant? Suddenly, Perseus remembered how Medusa had gotten cursed in the first place. She'd been playing hanky-panky with Poseidon in Athena's temple. Did that mean, oh gods, ever since Medusa had been turned into a monster, she'd been pregnant with Poseidon's offspring, unable to give birth because, well, who knew why? Maybe that was part of the curse. Perseus's courage faltered. Killing a monster was one thing. Killing a pregnant mother? That was completely different. Medusa turned in her sleep and faced him. Behind her, one of her gold wings unfolded against the cave wall. Her arms dropped, revealing sharp brass talons on her fingers. Her hair writhed, a nest of slithering green vipers. How could anyone sleep with all those little tongues flicking across her scalp? And her face. Perseus almost glanced over to make sure he was seeing it correctly in the reflection. Tusks, like a wild boar's, jutted from her mouth. Her lips curled in a permanent sneer. Her eyes bulged, making her look vaguely amphibian. But what really made her ugly was how her features were so misshapen and disproportionate. The nose, the eyes, the chin, the brow, all taken together. The face was so wrong it didn't make sense. You know those optical illusion pictures that make you dizzy and nauseous if you stare at them too long? Medusa's face was like that, except 1,000 times worse. Perseus kept his eyes on the reflection in the shield. His hand was so sweaty he could barely hold the sword. The reptilian smell of Medusa's hair filled his nostrils and made him want to gag. Despite the fact that he was invisible, the vipers must have sensed something was wrong. As he got closer, they hissed and bared their tiny fangs. Perseus couldn't see the other two Gorgons. Maybe they were sleeping in another part of the cave. Maybe they were out shopping for snake-friendly hair products. He inched closer until he was standing right over Medusa, but he wasn't sure he could kill her. She was still a pregnant whatever she was. Her ugliness just made him feel pity, not anger. He should be cutting off King Polydictus' head instead, but Perseus had made an oath. If he lost his nerve and backed out now, he doubted if he'd ever get a second chance. Then Medusa made up his mind for him. She must have sensed his presence. Maybe the snake hairdo warned her. Maybe she smelled the scent of a demigod. I've been told we smell like buttered toast to monsters, but I can't vouch for that. Her bugged-out eyes snapped open. Her talons curled. She shrieked like an electrocuted jackal and lunged, ready to slash Perseus to ribbons. Blindly, Perseus swung his sword. Ka-flump! Medusa fell backwards, collapsing across her cot. Bump, bump, bump. Something warm and wet rolled up to stop next to Perseus's foot. Ew. It took all of his nerve not to look, not to scream like a kindergartner and run away. Little dying viper heads tugged at the laces of his sandals. Very carefully, he sheathed his sword. He slung his shield over his shoulders and opened the leather sack. He knelt, keeping his eyes fixed on the cave ceiling, and grabbed the head of Medusa by its dead, snaky hair. He stuffed the head into the bag and made sure the drawstring was tightly tied. For the first time in several minutes, Perseus exhaled. He'd done it. He looked at the headless body of Medusa sprawled across the cot. On the floor, dark blood pooled, swirling and making strange patterns. Was blood supposed to do that? Two forms began to grow from the pool, swelling and rising as Medusa's body withered away to nothing. Perseus watched, transfixed, as a full-sized stallion burst out of the liquid like he was charging through a doorway. The horse reared and whinnied, spread eagle-like wings still flecked with blood. Perseus didn't realize it, but he had just witnessed the birth of Pegasus, the first winged horse. The second shape burst out of the blood, a man in golden armor with a gold sword in his hand. Later he would be called Chrysaor, the golden warrior, and he must have inherited some of his mother's looks because Perseus backed away from him really quick. You're probably wondering, why were Medusa's kids a golden warrior and a winged horse? And how had they been stuck in Medusa's body all those years? Heck, I don't know. I'm just telling you how it was. You want stuff to make sense? You're in the wrong universe. I don't know if Chrysaor would have fought Perseus or thanked him or what. But before they could even exchange phone numbers, Perseus backed into one of the marble statues. It toppled onto another statue, which toppled onto another, domino style, and, well, you get the idea. The cave filled with the sound of shattering stone heroes. Oops, Perseus said. From the left side of the cavern, a female voice hissed, Medusa, what is wrong? From the right, the third Gorgon hissed back, Intruder! Murderer! Perseus still wore his invisibility hat, but he wasn't going to trust that to protect him. He kick-started his winged sandals and blasted out of the cave at full speed. The two Gorgons screamed and launched after him. Their gold wings beat the air like crashing cymbals. The sound got louder, but Perseus didn't dare look back. He willed his sandals to give him more speed. The little dove wings began to burn against his ankles. Something scraped the sole of his shoe, which he had a bad feeling was a Gorgon's claw. In a desperate move, he spiraled so the sunlight flashed off the shield of his back. On his back, the Gorgons shrieked, momentarily blinded, and Perseus sped upwards into the clouds. A few hours later, he was pretty sure he'd lost the Gorgons, but he didn't stop until the sandals began to smoke. At this point, FAA regulations say you really have to land and do a safety check. Perseus came to rest on a barren outcropping of rock in the middle of the sea. In all directions he saw only water, but he could make out the last glow of the sunset on the horizon. Well, he said to himself, at least I know that direction is west. If I fly that way, I should eventually get home. Wrong. Dude must not have been paying attention while he was trying to get away from the Gorgons. Either that or he was using Apple Maps because he was totally off course. The next time he spotted land, it wasn't the island of Seriphos. It was a big swath of mainland, burned red hills and sandy desert stretching as far as he could see in the moonlight. Perseus had studied some geography in the Temple of Athena. He could only think of one place that looked like this. Africa? Is this seriously Africa? Yep, it was the coast of Africa. Which meant Perseus had flown way too far south. At that point, he was so tired, hungry, and thirsty, he didn't care. He figured he would find a town, get directions, and rest for a while. He flew along the coast until sunrise when he spotted the towers of a city in the distance. Hooray, he said to himself. Cities mean people. I like people. As he flew closer, he saw that something weird was going on. Several thousands of people had gathered along the docks of the harbor. They were staring at the water as if they were waiting for something. Toward the back of the crowd, a silk pavilion was set up where it looked like the king and queen of the city were observing whatever was going on. At the entrance to the harbor, a single spire of jagged rock jutted up from the sea. On the ledge, about 50 feet above the waves, chained to the rock, was a teenage girl. This is not normal behavior, Perseus thought. He took off his cap of invisibility so as not to startle the girl, like a dude with winged sandals flying toward you out of nowhere isn't startling, and flew down to see her. The girl acted strangely calm. She stared at him with beautiful dark eyes. Her hair was as black as ebony, her skin like polished copper. She wore only a plain green dress that showed off her lovely arms and neck. Perseus hovered next to her in the air. He tried to remember how to form a complete sentence. He was pretty sure he'd been able to do that a few moments before. You shouldn't be here, the girl told him. The sea monster will be here any second to kill me. Sea monster? Perseus snapped out of his daze. What's going on? Why are you chained to this rock? Because my parents are super lame. Okay. Details? My name is Andromeda. I'm the princess of that kingdom over there, Ethiopia. You mean your parents are the king and the queen? Perseus asked. And they let you be chained out here? Andromeda rolled her gorgeous eyes. It was their idea. Long story. My mom, Queen Cassiopeia, she's totally vain. About a year ago, she started bragging that she was even more beautiful than Poseidon's Nereids. Oh, snap. Perseus had never met a Nereid, but he heard about them. They were Poseidon's troupe of underwater sea goddesses, and they were supposedly stunning. He also knew that the gods hated it when humans compared themselves to immortals. Yeah, Andromeda agreed. So Poseidon got angry, and he sent this stupid sea monster to terrorize our city. It's been sinking ships, blowtorching the harbor, chomping up the fishermen, and totally making it impossible to get a tan on the beach. So this stupid local priest or whatever told my dad, King Cephas, that the only way to make Poseidon happy was to chain me to this rock as a human sacrifice. That's messed up, Perseus said. It wasn't your fault. I tried to explain that to the townspeople. It didn't go over so well. You don't seem very frightened. Andromeda shrugged as best she could with her arms in chains. There's not much I can do about it. Besides, getting killed by a sea monster doesn't sound as bad as living with my jerk parents. If they think I'm going to scream and plead for my life, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction. When that monster shows up, I plan on cussing at him so bad that his little aquatic ears will bleed. I've been practicing. Perseus thought for a moment. I'm sure your cuss words are formidable, but what if there's another way? What if I cut you free and save you? That would be cool, Andromeda said. But it doesn't solve the sea monster problem. I mean, the townspeople were pretty horrible to me, but I don't want the sea monster to slaughter them. Besides, the monster would probably follow me wherever I lived. Nah, Perseus said. Because I'll kill him. Andromeda stared at him. No offense. You're cute. And I'm sure you're brave. But the sea monster's like, well, actually, there he is now. Next to the spire of rock, the water boiled. The sea monster reared his dump truck-sized head. His face was covered in greenish-blue scales. Needle-sharp teeth lined his mouth. His neck arched out of the water until his yellow reptilian eyes were even with Andromeda's perch. Below sea level, the shadow of the thing's huge body looked like Nessie on steroids. The monster hissed, spewing drool and flames. He'd apparently been eating whales for appetizers because his breath was ultra rank. On the shore, the townspeople screamed and yelled. Perseus couldn't tell if they were terrified or just excited. After fighting Medusa, though, Perseus wasn't too impressed with this sea monster. "Andromeda," he said, "close your eyes." "Okay,"